Hello, my name is Jolene Teresa. I am the founder of Studio X Presents, and I'm here to talk to you today about producing or running a show. Now, this is a bit of information from our production course, which you can find on the website, but if you kind of have an idea and you just need confirmation, this is a great place to start. We're going to be specifically talking about the show, but I will give some reference to our competition. We're going to break this down into 3 parts. Prior to the show, during the show, and after the show. Starting with prior to the show. So prior to the show, you obviously have to create the show. You want to think about themes, casting, crew, sets, decor, everything that would go into actually having a show. Now you're going to need a space to have the show and make sure that that space works for what you're trying to do. Now because we have an aerial rig in our show, we definitely need to take into account ceiling height. There are a lot of venues that don't accommodate our aerial rig, which basically has to be at a minimum of 14 feet in order for the aerialist to really use. So if the ceiling height of the venue is lower than 14 feet on stage or in the area where performers will be, we can't really use it. Now choosing themes will basically be dependent on whether or not you want one. And if you want a theme, pick something vague. Pick something that people can really be creative with. Once you have your theme in your venue, you can start to decide what equipment will fit in there. If you're using aerial apparatuses or poles, maybe you're not. Maybe you just need to be able to fit 15 people on stage to dance. Whatever parameters you have, make sure that those fit within the venue and the theme that you're using, and then you can start to create sets and decorations that go within that theme. Casting your show. You're going to need performers. So you're either going to do open submissions or you're going to choose performers and reach out to them yourselves. We tend to do a mix of both. We bring in a lot of high-level or professional performers as a base for our show, and then we open submissions to amateur performers or maybe people that we just haven't worked with yet, and we fill in the rest of the show with those people. Now, a lot of performers are not reliable. Our base set of performers, our professional performers, are our reliable performers. These are people we have that have proven to show up on time every year. One of the main people we use is Kim Burley. She does pole and burlesque and is incredibly good at freestyling. And we use her because part of her job at the show is to learn both the opening group act and the finale group act. And she has her own act, but she also has to create a backup act just in case. Now, recently we did a show where 6 acts dropped within 30 days of the event. So you bet Kim Burley was doing 2 acts in that show. Having that backup plan is incredibly helpful, and having that base set of performers you know you can rely on is extremely helpful if you're going to do submissions. Now, when we cast a show, we always overcast knowing that people are going to drop. We definitely don't hold it against performers when they drop a show, but we do keep in mind that that makes them a bit unreliable and that we can't promise that they'll show up to an event in the future. Now, it may sound harsh, but we do keep a list of people who have no-showed and reasons for performers not attending an event. Now, there are obviously logical reasons to not make it to an event, but there's also reasons that don't make any sense, like when a performer says, "I was out of town and I just really didn't feel like it." Yeah, that's happened. Or people just don't show up at all and say, "Oh, I forgot." We don't cast them again because they're unreliable and they're obviously not taking it seriously. So when you're doing casting, keep in mind that you want to make sure you have your reliable people if you're going to be inviting people that have no skin in the game. Something that people do often when casting is they require a fee, small fee, 10, 20, 30 bucks, to submit. This submission fee is because you want the performers to have some skin in the game. You want them to have to give something to get something. Now, unfortunately for the reliable performers, that kind of sucks because they know they're going to show up, they have references that they're going to show up, but they're still going to have to pay that fee because other people won't. So figure out how you want to cast your show. Submissions, no submissions, invite only, and be really open about it so that there's no confusion with the public. Regardless of what type or size of show you're doing, you're going to need a crew. A production crew, a stage crew, whatever you want to call them, you need a crew. Now, much like our casting, we have a crew that we work with that's our base crew. Sometimes they shift around in jobs, but we do have a base crew, and then we bring in new people if they want to learn or help out or be a part of the show. Now, Vanessa is a staple in our backstage. Vanessa is our props manager, and she gets new jobs every year, but she always does something with props. And it's incredibly helpful to have Vanessa backstage because if there are any questions or concerns, even if it's outside of the scope of her job at the show, she probably has the answer to it because she's reliable and consistent and shows up every year. You need these base people in your stage or production crew just like you need them in your cast. Now, because we run a fairly small event, we don't necessarily pull production or stage crew members from outside of our network. You can open submissions for volunteers, but remember that they could be incredibly unreliable, and day of event, you need all hands on deck. So make sure that if you're doing volunteer submissions, you add a few extra hands just in case. Designing your show. Now, we have a lot of video tutorials on this, and there's a lot of information on our website, studioxpresents.com, including in our production course. But when you're designing your show, make sure you keep budget in mind and make sure that it's realistic. We're talking stage layout, space planning, apparatuses, building sets, props. You're going to have to keep all of these things in mind when you're designing the entire show. Now, for our show, we do have an opening and finale act that is curated by a choreographer. This is on purpose so that our guests see this entire curated thing at the beginning and the end, which kind of bookends the show. So remember, when you're designing your show, you're not only going to have to physically build everything, but you're going to have to plan everything out and schedule everything. Which brings us to our next topic, scheduling. You're going to want some type of pre-show meetings, especially if you're working with new people backstage, in order to make sure that they know what they need to be doing at the event. And if it's someone who's helping with rigging, make sure they're familiar with your equipment. And if they are but haven't worked on it in a while, bring them to a site where they can work with the equipment to make sure that they're familiar with your equipment. Now, on top of these prior to event meetings, you're going to want some type of schedule, like a production schedule. Now, if you've ever been involved with one of our events, you know that the response to any question is it on the production schedule? And that's on purpose. Our production schedule tells you exactly what time we're loading to go to the venue, when we should be at the venue, when load in should be completed, where everything goes and when it needs to be set up, whose task it is to set it up. It's color coordinated all the way through the run of show to load out. That schedule has every piece of information from the moment that people get to our storage site to pick up things for the event until we leave the venue. If you want it to happen prior, during, or after the event, there should be a schedule. Whether it's on the production schedule for the day of or not, you need to have everything scheduled out. So prior to the event, you're going to want some type of promotional materials, and you're going to want to have a schedule for when those are going live. You're also going to want physical promotional materials. So prior to your event, a lot of your scheduling is going to be figuring out what needs to be said to the public and when. What information do they need? They're going to need to know when and where the event is, what it is, how to buy tickets, and what they should expect. You're going to need to schedule out social media content or promotional content in order to make sure guests know when to be where and why they're there, how much it costs, etc. Now, on top of your production schedule, you're going to want additional documentation available and created prior to the event. Your rules and regulations, your procedures manual, your emergency manual, incident reports, everything that you could need for the event, you're going to want to have created, public information, if it should be public, and you're going to want printed copies as well to have at the event. Now, additional things we have specifically for our events, we do have a media release for every single person who's there on behalf of our company, and we do have some type of liability waiver depending on who and what the job is. Because we use a lot of different equipment, we do have rigging manuals and troubleshooting, especially because certain pieces of equipment just have weird things about them. And if we know that one of our poles does XYZ sometimes, we want to put that in the troubleshooting. So when someone is having issues on stage, we know, oh, that's typically this issue. All we have to do is this and it will adjust. Having these manuals is incredibly helpful, especially for a safety-based event like Studio X Presents hosts, because we want to know, is this something that we're familiar with or is this a new issue? If it's a new issue, is it a safety concern? Especially with the apparatuses we're using, we would never want to put anyone in a situation that could be harmful or dangerous, so we want to make sure that we have all the documentation needed for our apparatuses to ensure safety. During your event. Now, like we just said, we are a safety-based event, so we go over safety a lot during the event. We have our production schedule, which tells everyone what they should be doing, but we also have a meeting. We do a meeting before the event or the show just to go over parameters where we remind everyone that we are a safety-based event. Regardless of what it is, if something feels unsafe, tell a staff member so that we can address it immediately and ensure the safety of all persons in the venue under our care. Atop of that, we want to make sure everyone knows where the documentation is. The emergency documentation, incident reports, rules and regulations. Depending on the competition or the show, this information differs a little bit, but for the most part, we use the same procedures manuals and emergency protocols for any and all events that we're doing. We also want to make sure that we're introducing our cast or our competitors to our stage crew. If we're rigging up equipment for them, we want to introduce them to the rigger and remind them this rigger knows what they're doing. Please communicate with them, because we may not know your equipment, but we do know our equipment, and we want to make sure that we're keeping this as safe as possible. During the event, we also do require mats, physical mats, under our aerial equipment for all aerialists unless they have their own insurance dictating that they do not need a mat based on their insurance. Our insurance covers us, but we want to make sure that our performers are covered as well. At all of our live events, we also have a medic on site. Maybe this is someone who is just attending the event in case of an issue and is watching the whole show to make sure they have eyes on all performers at all times. Typically, this is someone who has backstage access simply because something might happen backstage and it may be a stage crew member that needs medical assistance. Either way, no matter what size or type of event you're running, having a medical professional on site is incredibly helpful. Now, because we do pole and aerial, we often have many medical professionals in the building, but we always want one designated person. This is the person that knows, no matter what happens, if emergency occurs, they are required to call first responders. Even if everyone else in the venue is calling, this person is required to call. That way we know for sure someone has relayed to first responders that they're needed. So having a medic on site is incredibly helpful and highly recommended because for most events it is required. But again, pole and aerial is highly unregulated, so it's not required, but it should be. During your event, you also need a production schedule. I have no idea how events run without these, but you're going to want some type of documentation, production schedule, that tells everyone what needs to be done by who, by when, and where it should be done. Anything and everything that has to be done at the event should be on this production schedule. This is your holy grail of information. Again, if you have ever been involved with one of our events, you know this. Because if someone says, hey, do you know what time I go on stage? Our crew is just gonna look at you and say, it's on the production schedule. And they'll point out where it is, but it's on that schedule. That schedule has all important information that's needed by any cast or staff member, and we post them up everywhere backstage, plus every crew member gets a copy. That way they can write on it if they need to, but also so that everyone has the exact same information and all of the information is available. Now, production schedules can get kind of chaotic, so if you want more information on how to create those, hop over to our website, studioxpresents.com, and check out our production course, which will give you a lot of information, but will definitely give you more detailed information about creating your production schedule. So during your event, you really want to take into account safety parameters and that production schedule. Make sure you're keeping everyone in your care safe, but also make sure that everyone knows what needs to get done and when. This way you have a nice, smooth, and seamless event. Two important things we like to keep in mind for after a show is inventory and media. So inventory, when you get home from the event, probably the next day, you want to make sure you go through everything and that you have what went with you to the venue. And if you don't have it, make sure you find it. Sometimes that's expensive equipment, sometimes it's unimportant. But doing this a day after the event is incredibly helpful because you know what you're missing and you know exactly who should have it. And if they do have it, they have it readily available because it's either in their car or was just brought into their house. Now, inventory is annoying, and if you've ever done a show with me, you know that we have packing lists. There is an entire list of what came to the venue with us, quantities, colors, what box it should be in, and the boxes are labeled. And although we hope it goes back in that same box, sometimes it doesn't. And if I can't find it, then I'm going to reach out to my crew and say, where is it? Because sometimes that is a $2,000 light. Sometimes it's a couple of pens, in which case I don't really care. But inventory is incredibly helpful for the following event you're doing because you know what you have on hand. Maybe someone has costumes and they haven't gotten back to you yet, and maybe you don't necessarily know if they're reliable enough to get them back to you on time, so you need a backup plan. But you know that because you've done your inventory. Your inventory is also really helpful for planning future events because you know what you have on hand for designing sets or decorations or even costuming. Part of your inventory should be double checking your equipment. Make sure that if you're using stage poles, all of the pieces have been put back in and nothing looks awry, because if your equipment is broken or damaged, you do want to buy new equipment fairly immediately so you have it on hand for your next event. Because again, safety is important and damaged equipment is unsafe equipment. Another really important thing to do after your event is media. Now, we work with some phenomenal photographers who tend to have a really quick turnaround time because we work with events photographers, not necessarily photo editors. Now, if you're interested in learning more about photographers, you can check out our Choosing Photographers video, which goes a little bit more in depth as to why photographers, specifically events photographers, are a bit more helpful for events than just your average photographer. Now, nothing wrong with anyone who wants to become a photographer, but photographing events can be incredibly difficult, especially events that are low lighting, fast moving, metal, glitter, all sorts of issues with lighting. We have some really great photographers. We work with two specifically right now in the Northeast, Lena Glacier and MK Photography, who know our events, and they have a really fast turnaround time. So the first thing we want to do after the event is start posting the content to make sure we're continuing that engagement. We also have our theme contest, which you can learn more about that in our theme contest video, but we're trying to keep that audience engaged. There's usually an energetic high that happens after an event, both for the attendees and for the participants. And we want to keep that going and help with the fizzling down. We also want to be able to share photo and video with our cast and crew because everybody likes a good photo video of themselves. So scheduling out your social media content in a way that makes sense, in a way that trickles down from your event and leads towards your next announcement, launch, or event. Now, this may seem like it's not a big deal, but people want to know. If they were interested and had a great time at your event, they want to know when the next one is. They want to know how to stay involved and informed. So there you have it. That is our prior to event, during event, and after event basics. Again, if you're looking for more information on this, hop over to our website, studioxpresents.com. We do have more information on the website, but we also do have a production course. So if you're just starting out and you're interested in learning more and you really just need that base bones understanding for where to go, what to do, what's required, what's recommended, how to build these things, check out that course. And as always, please stay safe out there.